I am glorious. I am beautiful. I am wild. Traverse my dunes, walk my pristine shores, explore my forests and waterways, respect and admire my wildlife. Discover me, spend time with me. You will feel my allure. I am Queen of the North. For more than a year, international award-winning photographers Todd and Brad Reed made it their quest to photograph every angle, every mood of the Ludington State Park. The fruits of their journey are these breathtaking images. Todd and Brad Reed capture the power and beauty of Lake Michigan, the majesty of the Sauble River, the tranquility of Hamlin Lake, and the many secrets of the park's 30 miles of hiking and cross-country trails. With their cameras, the Reeds hunt and capture moments that bring you eye to eye with the eagle, deer, fox, and otter. Discover the flight of ducks, swans, herons, and plover within the protective boundaries of the park. Join Todd and Brad on their year-long journey through 5,300 acres of beaches, dunes, forests, and waters. The Ludington State Park. Learn why generations of visitors to her pristine lands and waters are drawn back their entire lives. She is the Queen of the North.
The meaning of this book really changed from when my dad and I originally kind of storyboarded the idea of what we were going to do. We're big believers in staying close to home and really showing people what's around them that they don't notice. And so we wanted to do a book on the park. And for me, being the business guy and the nuts and bolts and counting the money and all of that, I saw it as a great marketing tool. And the relationship with the park was really kind of secondary. But as the book went on and the more time we spent shooting and spending time at the park, we really fell in love with the park as the park itself. I mean, it became part of our souls. It became part of our therapy as the book evolved. You know, our vision became more about the emotion of the actual art and the feelings that we got in the park and putting those on film than it did about a marketing idea that we originally had. So the book became just much more emotionally tied to both of us than I think we ever imagined it ever could have been. This book, I would say, besides just photographing the eagles and a few other times, the majority of the time I was photographing, I was by myself, so it became a solitary journey, much like my dad's first book was for him, yet you never really felt totally alone because you were with the park. I mean, you felt part of the park, the ducks, the geese. You know, we spent enough time photographing the swans, you could start to pick out which swan was which baby went with which mom. You know, it became much more than what we ever had imagined it would be. And I think it will always continue to be a learning experience. Every time we go out to the park now, we have much more open eyes and an open sense of feeling and emotion and letting things in. We're seeing things that we may not have seen if we hadn't done this book. It was December 14th, 2006, and I had spent the evening at the park shooting the sunset, and there's 4 or 5 shots in the book from that night. It was just a glorious late fall evening with amazing light. Went home, you know, it got dark, I was eating dinner, and about 8 o'clock my cell phone rang, and it was my dad, and he said, the northern lights are out, and he said, you gotta head to the park. And I said, I'm gone. So I told Betsy, I said, honey, I'll see you later, I don't know when I'll be back. And I ran out, got my truck, drove to the park, and got to the first curve, and I know how light changes, and I wanted to just get a picture on film right away, and maybe at that point go deeper into the park. So I parked at the first curve right at the entrance, ran across M116 to the east, over a first big dune, and just sat there, and the sky just kept getting more and more green and more vibrant with the northern lights. And about probably 40 minutes after I got there, the green really peaked, and it was in the northern sky, and it was to the north and northwest, northeast, everywhere you looked. It was just these vibrant greens and yellows, and they were ebbing and flowing. And right over my shoulder, up on top of the dune that I was hiding from, I started to see this red glow. I ran up the dune, and I had left my camera where it was because it was exposing a photograph. Ran up the dune and looked to the west, right over Lake Michigan, and the whole sky was flaming red. And I ran back down the dune. My camera was done exposing, picked it up, tripod and all, sprinted up the dune as fast as I could and slammed it down. Really didn't even compose the shot, just faced it straight west towards Lake Michigan, hit the shutter button, and it exposed for another 30 seconds. And in that total of a minute and a half of shooting below the dune and on top of the dune, I got two of the best photographs I've probably ever taken in my life. And the one at the bottom showed the green lights, the one at the top of the dune showed the red lights. And besides the northern lights being more vibrant than I'd ever seen in my life and all the colors, there was a meteor shower that was going. And most meteors I had ever seen were just solid white streaks of light real quick. But these meteors were little balls of fire, and you could see the meteors breaking up. And then each ball would slowly expand. And if you want to talk about a spiritual moment, it was as high as I've ever been. And it actually, and I write about that in the caption, it almost got spooky because it was so intense. And it was probably the highlight of the whole experience for me shooting at the park. Being on this dune by myself, no one else around, and feeling so vulnerable yet so close to God. It was a very unique experience. A lot of images in a photographer's mind never actually get put on a digital sensor or on a piece of film because you just didn't have the right light or the right camera, but the picture's still there. So when that light gets good, you're going to see a lot of our vehicles out at the state park in the future chasing the light and trying to get those images. Hamlin Lake sunrise. Calm water, geese, fog, and a colorful sunrise are all common ingredients in outdoor photography. When you combine all four of them in one photograph, you have a recipe for success. Great race. I enter a dark woods off of Piney Ridge Road and soon come to a wall of sand. I start to ascend the massive sand giant, stopping occasionally to let the burning in my legs recede. It is a race. Photographer versus the sunlight of early morning. I crest the peak and turn to the east to see if I've won. I notice beautiful yellow flowers at my feet. I get into position and only have to wait 2 minutes for the sun. Beautiful. Dawn on Lost Lake. Fall is a nice time of year to shoot sunrises because you don't have to get out of bed as early to catch the first light of day. The best light to photograph a sunrise often appears 20 minutes before the sun actually appears on the horizon. I made this photograph at Lost Lake during one of our picture-perfect weekend workshops. Several of our students made equally compelling photographs.
Rare bird. A 3-day-old piping plover is dwarfed by dune grass near a pond in the dunes north of Big Point Sable Lighthouse. The tiny bird has no idea it is a rare, endangered species. Michigan Department of Natural Resources piping plover steward, Katrina Hernandez, and I have spent a couple hours this morning finding the plover and the rest of its family after they fled from the cage and fencing designed to keep people and predators away, yet not to restrict the birds from leaving. South wind. Marram grass bends against a south wind as the sun sets on an October evening along the Lake Michigan shoreline at an area of Ludington State Park long referred to as the second curve. The hardy dune grass thrives in an often severe environment, standing up to the wind and sand that buries it as the grass and its roots slow and stop blowing sand grains. Soaring. Our adrenaline flies off the chart as this bald eagle sweeps right over the top of our photography skiff on Hamlin Lake. My son Brad and I have set out this morning in our tiny Boston whaler to try to show another avid bird photographer, Dr. Zane Canor, an eagle to photograph. We are getting a better eagle show than we could have dreamed. Lovebirds. A pair of mature bald eagles sits majestically on a favorite perch in one of the largest white pine trees in Ludington State Park. It took months for Brad and me to learn the daily habits and haunts of several mature eagles we discovered at the park. I was able to make this photograph not only because we had learned where to look for the eagles, but also because we had learned how and how close we could approach without alarming them. Experience is a good teacher. I was rewarded with one of my all-time favorite wildlife images. Taking flight. A not yet fully mature bald eagle begins to take off from a fishing perch on Hamlin Lake at Ludington State Park. This eagle is one of the first of several mature and immature bald eagles Brad and I photographed for several months. Finding the rare birds and photographing them without interfering with their daily routines is a challenge Brad and I passionately and intensely pursue. I remember our first eagle sighting. We were raging with hunter's fever. I don't know how we ever got off a shot, let alone a good one. But soon good teamwork, strategy, and self-control led to images like this.
Queen of the North. Our friends Dave and Chrissy Hall, lifelong visitors and supporters of the Ludington State Park, graciously offered to take my dad and me in their airplane to photograph aerial views of the park and its surroundings. On a clear May evening in 2007, I made this photo from several thousand feet in the air. The photograph clearly shows the Lake Michigan shoreline, the Sable River, all of Hamlin Lake, Big Point Sable Lighthouse, the Northouse Dunes, part of the Manistee National Forest, and the entire Ludington State Park. Striking. In the workshops my dad and I lead, we tell our students not to be afraid of turning their cameras vertically. Some of our favorite photographs we have ever made are vertical images. On this day, I took a horizontal photograph and a vertical photograph about 10 seconds apart. The composition in the vertical photograph was a definite winner.
Enchanting forest. Dwarfed by the forest, a cross-country skier glides silently along the logging trail on one of those winter days that winter lovers live for. I have skied the logging trail so many times, I've memorized the views that will greet me over the next hill or around the next curve. Yet I never tire of my logging trail journeys. There is something comforting about knowing a place. It is a feeling like home. Lost Lake Explorers. Catching sight of a pair of kayakers paddling in one of the many picturesque coves on Lost Lake, I momentarily find myself wanting to join them, to discover what they are discovering, to see what they are seeing. But I've already made my choice to hike the island trail this day, and I am content to return to my own path of discovery.
A walk to remember. Couples of all ages love to leisurely stroll along the winding shores of Lake Michigan. The sound of the undulating waves, the smell of the beach grass, and the feeling of sand between your toes is so inviting that you can't resist the temptation of our West Michigan shorelines. Making memories. Generations of families have enjoyed decades of fun and quality time together while camping at one of the 3 amazing campgrounds in Ludington State Park. Most families have a favorite spot that they try to reserve in January for the coming year. Good food, laughter, and fun stories are often shared around the campfire, and great memories are made for all.
Wise one. The porcupines of Ludington State Park had eluded our cameras for months. On this particular day, after scouting for a spot to set up a portable blind and shoot some wood ducks with my camera, I made up my mind to spend the rest of the day on the trails looking up in the trees as much as possible. Several hours and one sore neck later, I spotted this porcupine. I was rewarded for my effort to concentrate on seeing, really seeing, wildlife high up in the trees. The porcupine wisely stood perfectly still and blended its body into the tree trunk and branch as well as it could. The telephoto lens revealed to me that the beautiful creature was aware of my presence. Its only body movement during the time it took to make a portrait was the occasional opening or closing of its eyes.
Air Force. Over time, man has designed and built many beautiful things. The Colosseum in Rome, the Statue of Liberty, and the 1965 Ford Mustang, just to name a few. They are each a perfect blending of beautiful lines and powerful angles. However, none of them compare to one of God's most beautiful creations of all time, the bald eagle. Aurora Borealis. Oftentimes, while I am photographing an extraordinary light show, I ponder what our human ancestors must have felt when they witnessed similar sights thousands of years ago. On December 14th, 2006, as I stood on a dune inside the Ludington State Park and photographed the Aurora Borealis and an incredible meteor shower, I was overcome by a rush of emotions. The light show was so intense that it evoked a sense of fear in me. I knew nothing horrible was actually happening, but the sky was so turbulent that it still made me feel a bit uneasy. I imagine that our ancestors might have felt true fear because they did not have the knowledge of modern science to explain what they were seeing. Awakening. Standing on the top of Desperation Point, looking over Hamlin Lake, I was awestruck by the calm that surrounded me on this warm summer morning. The water was a mirror of tiny ripples, the wind was gently blowing, and the birds were just starting to sing. Just after making this photograph, I watched a bald eagle fly below me and dip into Hamlin Lake to catch a fish in its mighty talons. This is a morning I will never forget.
Keeping watch. Determined to safeguard their offspring, a pair of proud-looking Canada geese share the watch while their tiny gosling peers out from beneath its mother's chest. I love exploring Ludington State Park in the springtime, looking for scenes like this one of the natural world coming alive with new life. I made this image from a respectful distance with a large telephoto lens, then moved on to seek other discoveries. Baby talk. Almost every day for 2 weeks in May, I hiked the island trail at Ludington State Park, hoping to see newborn swan cygnets appear in this nest. I had envisioned making a photograph with several cygnets and one or both parents for this book. Instead of the picture I had pre-visualized, I was finally rewarded on May 17 with a simpler, more unique shot. A lone first-hatch cygnet crawled out of the nest and waddled precariously around the top edge until coming face to face with its mother. I tripped the shutter at the instant world-famous French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson liked to call the decisive moment.
Springtime parade. It's comical to watch geese trying to walk on land, especially when they are only a few days old. This particular group of goslings seemed to be quite fond of the game leapfrog. As they passed by my camera, they clumsily hopped over each other while trying to keep up with the rest of the family.
Blazing. A blaze in color, maple leaves stand out against a backdrop of pine trees along Hamlin Lake near the Hamlin Dam. The fall color hotspots at Ludington State Park remain the same year after year, but the colors change based on the weather and the quality of direction of light at the moment of viewing. Bright brush strokes. Turning your camera into a paintbrush is as simple as painting across a subject with your camera during a long exposure. The results are often both impressionistic and surprising. During one of our photography workshops, I demonstrated how to paint some overturned kayaks stacked together along Hamlin Lake. I liked the results more than I expected.
Explosion of color. My dad and I are fortunate that our gallery customers give us hints that help us capture some of our best photographs at the Ludington State Park. Last fall, a traveling nurse from the Ludington Hospital stopped in the gallery and told me about a flaming red and orange tree she had seen the day before on the ridge trail at the park. With her detailed directions, I was able to easily spot the tree and was lucky enough to walk away with a smile on my face. Fuzzy was he. After a 2-mile hike in the hot August sun, I walked back to my truck with my head down, disappointed that I hadn't made any good pictures. I was pleasantly surprised to find this caterpillar 10 yards from my truck. I quickly put my macro lens on my camera and got down on my hands and knees to make this photograph.
Summer wings. While searching for piping plovers that abandoned their protected nesting site in the sand dunes north of Big Point Sable Lighthouse, I observed this delicate Halloween pennant dragonfly laying near a pond tucked between the dunes. I stealth closer, then photograph it with a telephoto lens. Thus I avoid scaring the dragonfly away and keep the background out of focus to simplify the picture and make the small insect stand out.
Asian lady beetle. I love macro photography because it allows me to journey into new worlds where the details of subjects create a completely new visual experience. Living near Lake Michigan, I had seen thousands of these sometimes pesky Asian lady beetles. I had no idea they wore such a determined look on their face until I got down in their world with my macro lens.
Magic mirror. Only a few minutes after a downpour interrupted one of our photography workshops and sent Brad and me and our students scurrying back to vehicles, a rainbow and accompanying stormlight appeared in the southern sky. The rainbow sent us all scrambling to make a picture. I remembered a nearby pond between the dunes. Bingo! The magic light was reflected in the glassy surface of the pond. Each of us realized this was a spectacular moment in time. Dune Mountain. The scene before me reminded me of mountains I have seen and skied down with my sons in backcountry areas of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. These mountains are actually sand dunes in the southern part of Ludington State Park. On this day, I enjoyed the mountainous look that an unusually heavy snowfall had helped create. Topside view. The shadow of the 112-foot-tall Big Sable Lighthouse is cast on duneland north of the lighthouse. The pristine view northward from atop the light tower reveals part of the thousands of acres of protected state and federal land along the Lake Michigan shoreline north of the lighthouse. Great Light. Big Sable Lighthouse looks its 140th birthday party best during an anniversary celebration held by the light's amazing crew of volunteer caretakers. The Sable Point lighthouse keepers work tirelessly year after year to maintain and restore the lighthouse and attached keepers' quarters. Thousands of visitors each year get to enjoy the fruits of the keepers' labors.
First curve view of Badger. The first curve at the Ludington State Park is one of the most popular places in Ludington to watch the SS Badger car ferry steam in and out of port. I used a 500mm lens and a tripod to make this photograph from the water's edge at the first curve on an October evening in 2007.
Skyline view of Badger. Those who climb their way to the top of the Skyline Trail are rewarded with a bird's eye view of the southern portion of the park. If they time their hike to the schedule of the car ferry Badger and look through a good pair of binoculars or a large telephoto camera lens, they might also enjoy one of the best views they've ever seen of the big ship heading out of Ludington Harbor.
1930s classic. Since the 1930s, the beach house at Ludington State Park has served many functions. My favorite memories of the beach house are the massive family reunions my mom's family would have there when I was young. While the adults were busy catching up on the past year's events, we kids were busy exploring the mysterious castle on the beach. West Wind. My high school math teacher, Mr. Budd, told his students many funny stories of his days working as a park ranger at the Ludington State Park. Mr. Budd also taught us to kiss Keep it simple, silly. I often try to apply KISS to my photographic compositions. Simple compositions can become great art. Radiant. In 1994, my dad made one of his best-selling photographs of all time. Stormlight shows Little Point Sabo Lighthouse bathed in dramatic light of an October storm. Since that time, my dad and I have been working to make a photograph of Big Point Sabo Lighthouse with the same quality of light. On the afternoon of November 5th, 2007, radiant stormlight appeared in front of my camera for less than 3 seconds as I stood on the blustery shores of Lake Michigan. Sands of Time. When I first came upon this scene, I quickly noticed an orange leaf stuck in the tired-looking snow fence. I frantically tried to make a good close-up photograph of the leaf while the magic light was still hitting it. After getting frustrated and stepping back from the scene, I noticed the repetitive patterns and leading lines that the sand and the snow made together. I recomposed the photograph and made the leaf an added ingredient. Little did I know that a few hours later I would be back out at the park photographing the northern lights.
Watercolor art. Lake Michigan waves colored with sunset afterglow wash ashore near the second curve at Ludington State Park, creating ever-changing watercolor artwork. Just as quickly as one of these wave paintings appears, it starts to disappear as the wave energy is spent and gravity carries the water back lakeward. Seeing and capturing these interesting but fleeting patterns of light and shadow is challenging and a good exercise in seeing. Nature does the painting. The photographer's role is to watch, recognize a picture, and shoot before the painting erases itself.
Dream catchers. My sister-in-law, Misty Reed, likes to imagine that the little feather in this photograph represents her, and the big feather represents her husband, my older brother, Tad. I'm not sure how the feathers got stuck upright in the sand, but I love the dreamy mood of this photograph.
Lost Lake watercolor. Looking more like a watercolor painting than a photographic image, the island trail at Ludington State Park has never looked more gorgeous to me than on this November morning. Autumn Voyager. The Ludington State Park Canoe Trail is one of the park's least traveled and most beautiful areas for a fall color tour. On days like this, many of us ask ourselves why we don't launch a canoe more often. Time passes and too many voyages go untaken.
Sunrise on Lost Lake. Generally, to make a powerful grand scenic photograph, you need a strong foreground, middle ground, and background. The trick is to get the 3 separate layers of the photograph to overlap in a way that the viewer's mind will not get bored and leave the photograph. You want to encourage the viewer's eye to move all around the photograph. The viewer will also tend to have a greater emotional interest in the piece of art.
Framing autumn. One of the concepts my son Brad and I emphasize to our photography students is framing. Using something in the foreground to frame or partially frame an image provides immediacy, depth, and an added interest element. I framed this shot shortly after sunrise at the beginning of November along the Lost Lake Trail. Framing winter. I photographed Ludington State Park for several hours on a glorious January morning after the biggest snowfall of the winter. Then it occurred to me that a spot where I had taken a photograph of fall color might also look spectacular in winter. A half hour of hiking later, I was making this picture. The 2 shots show how places that are beautiful in one season may well be beautiful in another. Regal Hunter. I came upon this scene while hiking along the Coast Guard Trail near Hamlin Lake. Staying as quiet as possible, not to appear threatening to the fearless hawk, I slowly set up my camera and tripod. The hawk accepted my presence and began the grisly process of eating its prey. The fur from the squirrel's beautiful tail fluttered in the wind. As is often nature's way, the scene was a visual and emotional paradox, so deadly, yet so beautiful. I went away saddened but exhilarated, focusing on the beauty and knowledge that what I had just witnessed was natural and necessary.
Sly Fox. A great wildlife photographer friend of my dad's and mine told us several years ago, quote, "If you don't get off the couch, you'll never be able to make good photographs," end quote. Our friend was right. The more time you spend outdoors shooting, the better your odds of capturing a great moment in nature. On a warm October afternoon in 2007, I was tired of looking at the computer all day and drove out to the Ludington State Park for a mental health break. 20 minutes into the shoot, a curious fox crept very close to the tree I was resting against. The fox held still long enough for me to take 2 photographs. I was never so glad in my life that I had gotten off the couch.
Owlie, a great horned owl, eyes visitors to Ludington State Park. The owl was a star attraction during one of the many wildlife education programs put on at the park's Great Lakes Visitor Center. Wildlife Recovery Association had brought the beautiful bird and several other injured birds of prey to the Nature Center. Attending the park's interpretive programs helps thousands of visitors better understand, appreciate, and respect the park and all its living things.
Screaming eagle. Venturing deeper into wildlife photography has been a wonderful challenge. We invested a lot of money into a 500mm Nikon f4 lens and a new carbon fiber tripod designed for heavy telephoto lenses. We quickly learned that even with the best equipment, great wildlife photographs depend most of all on the light and capturing the defining moment. After a year of searching for the bald eagle shot I had always pre-visualized at Ludington State Park, my luck changed on July 25th, 2007. Perch fishing. Large telephoto lenses are great for photographing wildlife because they allow you to keep your distance from the subject. Many times the subject doesn't even know it is being photographed, and its behavior will continue in its natural state. This great blue heron was focused on finding fish in Hamlin Lake and was not bothered by me while I photographed it with a 1050mm telephoto lens.
Eye on the prize. A rough-legged hawk stands out against a backdrop of pine trees outside the Great Lakes Visitor Center at Ludington State Park. The rehabilitating bird was being held by Joe Rogers of Wildlife Recovery Association for park visitors to see and learn about. Wildlife Recovery cares for injured and orphaned wildlife and sets free those that are ready to re-enter the wild.
2 eagles. Seeing one bald eagle on a perch from 30 yards away is a rush. Seeing a pair of eagles from that distance is breathtaking. It is no wonder why the founding fathers of this great nation chose the bald eagle to represent the pride of America. Eagles are majestic and powerful-looking creatures, and when you see how large their talons are, you quickly respect them as well.
Brotherly love, appearing to be huddling together against the cold, or perhaps just having a conversation about the just ducky weather. 2 male mallards endure some foul weather on the Sauble River. Soul mates. Mute swans use their wings as sails to cruise the Sauble River in perfect symmetry on a winter afternoon. Though not as rare as the trumpeter swans that are occasionally spotted at the park, the mute swans with their telltale orange bills are equally beautiful and awe park visitors wherever they appear. Marsh grass. Whoever thinks swamps are ugly has never really seen one. Look past preconceived notions or connotations. Spend time getting acquainted with the swampy areas of Ludington State Park. The result? Seeing and savoring scenes like this one I discovered while hiking the Island Trail. Shelter Cove. Brad maneuvered our shallow draft photo shooting boat to help me compose this image of one of the most beautiful coves on Hamlin Lake. The shelter building near where the Island Trail meets the Ridge Trail is in the background. On windy days, the cove provides welcome shelter from the waves that are often quick to pick up. Thankfully, Hamlin Lake was in a tranquil mood this summer morning. Beauty and the Beast. A spider bridges the gap between clusters of blue vervain growing in the sand dunes south of Sauble River. I discovered the delicate flowers on one of the many summer hikes I've made on these southern park trails that are far less traveled than most of the other trails in the state park. I love the fresh views these trails provide as they weave through the sand, jack pines, and wetlands tucked in the valleys between the dunes.
Inspirational art. I have always been envious of my cousin Ryan Reed's artistic abilities. Not only is he a world-class photographer, he also has a talent for drawing and painting. If I could draw or paint well, these wildflowers would be my inspiration.
Island iris. After spotting and making an image of a dozen yellow iris flowers blooming in a marshy area on the island trail, I followed one of our main teaching concepts and moved twice as close, and then twice as close again, and began looking for a stronger, simpler image that would reveal the true beauty and detail of the yellow iris. I liked this image better than the first shot, which failed to make the final edit of my images to be considered for this book. Rising stars. White camas flowers bask in the warm sunlight of a late June afternoon in the dunes at the south end of Ludington State Park. Summertime visitors seeking solace and new discoveries might want to consider a hike in this less traveled region of the park.
Hamlin Lake Mirage. It is amazing to me how often mirages or double images of the shoreline will appear throughout a given year. As I stood on the docks at the Sable Resort overlooking frozen Hamlin Lake, I noticed that the Hamlin dunes were being reflected onto themselves near the waterline. As I was photographing, the sun appeared and turned the sky a brilliant gold color, and the mirage looked even more mysterious. Winter's coat. My dad and I try to dress for success when we are photographing in the winter. On this day, I had all of my gear except my fleece hood. Right before I made this photograph, a large clump of snow fell on my head and went down my back. It reminded me of the snowball fights I had with my brothers when I was a kid.
Winter at Hamlin Dam. Visitors flock to the Hamlin Dam in summer and in fall when the salmon are running. Few get the chance to see it in winter. Neither Brad nor I could sleep the night before I made this picture, and Brad and I made several other images in this book. We knew before going to bed that the overnight snowfall was going to be a photographer's dream. We were kept awake dreaming of the pictures that awaited us. At first light, dreams came true. Golden eye. On an icy February morning, the eye of a female goldeneye provides the lone spot of bold color in an otherwise monochromatic winter scene. The duck's brown head and grayish body distinguish it from its male counterpart, which is largely black and white with green head.
Migrations. After cresting the first massive sand dune near the end of the Ridge Trail in the Ludington State Park, my dad and I were blown away by the number of canvasback ducks that congregated on Hamlin Lake below us. As we stood catching our breath, a pair of large geese flew overhead and startled some of the ducks. With a thunderous roar, several hundred ducks took to the air at once. The partially frozen lake and the fog amplified the sound and also created a gorgeous backdrop for this photograph. The road less traveled. I have a teaching degree and several credits towards a master's degree in social work. But as I went down those roads in life, I found they weren't for me. I took the road less traveled, followed my heart, and went into photography full time. As in the Robert Frost poem, that has made all the difference.
Winter spark. A male cardinal, in all his glory, perches on a rock along the Sable River. The redbirds stand out year-round, but especially brighten the winter landscape of the park and brighten my day. Ludington Oriole. Okay, it's really a Baltimore Oriole, but since it was residing in Ludington State Park, and since my 3 sons and I were all Ludington Orioles during high school, I have taken some editorial license. The colorful songbird had probably recently returned from the south when I came upon him in mid-May on the island trail.
The dark side. I have never witnessed such a radically divided storm front as the one that confronted me on the shores of Lake Michigan on the evening of July 12, 2007. As I burrowed my tripod into the sand, I could not decide in which direction to photograph. To the north, the sky was black, and a massive storm front was quickly approaching my location. To the south, the sky and water looked tropical and calm. I decided to be daring and wait about 30 seconds for the storm to literally get on top of me, and then I photographed straight west. The end result was a photographic version of a taijitu, the traditional symbol representing the forces of yin and yang. Marvelous moon. The moon is an extremely difficult subject to photograph. If you set your exposure according to the camera meter, then you get some detail in the night sky and foreground, but the moon is a solid white circle with no detail. If you underexpose by 3 or 4 stops, then you get the cheese of the moon, but no detail in the sky or foreground. The moon also moves so quickly that it requires a relatively fast shutter speed. When it's dark outside, the only way to get a fast shutter speed is to raise your ISO or film speed. However, high film speeds are grainy or noisy. The choice is yours.
Frosty. Oh, to experience another winter morning as stunning as this. I love below zero mornings. The sky is usually crystal clear and the morning light brilliant. But I never imagined the beauty that would await me at the Sable River outlet this February morning. Steam coming off the water at sunrise had turned the grass to shimmering white shafts on the dunes south of the outlet. Fall drama. I yearn for the dramatic light and the winds that come to Lake Michigan shoreline in the fall. This perfect combination creates a world of beautifully lit patterns of grasses, waves, and clouds. The car ferry SS Badger, steaming back to Ludington from Wisconsin, provided an added ingredient to the scene on this October day. Path to glory. For most of us, following dune paths to Lake Michigan brings anticipation of great times and great views. On some days, though, the view is unforgettable. Big Point Sable. The sand dunes at Big Point Sable were formed several thousand years ago. Wind and water have been changing them ever since. I took this aerial photograph more than 20 years ago, when rising Lake Michigan water levels were threatening to wash Big Point Sable Lighthouse away. Most of the ponds visible between dunes in this scene were dry when I last explored this region. Sailing north. Watching from atop the ridge trail as this lone vessel sailed north on a September Lake Michigan cruise, I couldn't help but think of hundreds of times when I had cruised the same waters aboard Coast Guard rescue boats. When not too busy focusing on a mission, I was always awestruck by the natural beauty and the remoteness of the dunes and forests these recreational voyagers were undoubtedly appreciating this day. It made me long for those Coast Guard boat rides, both the calm ones and the really rough ones. Big Point Sable is on average the windiest spot on Lake Michigan. Lone loon. I spotted this loon on Hamlin Lake during a June hike in Ludington State Park. Photographing it was a personal highlight in a photographic journey that spanned more than a year. I dreamed of re-encountering the loon twice as close or twice as close again. But in 6 more months of hiking and boating in the park, I never saw a loon again. I am grateful for the opportunity to see this one. Dune waves. Looking like waves rushing ashore on an autumn evening. A ridge of sand dunes stops short for now of the forested areas downwind. The prevailing westerly winds keep the waves of sand moving, of course at a fraction of the speed of the monstrous real waves nearby Lake Michigan churns up during a November gale. November glory. The northwest wind sandblasts me and nearly blows me off the top of the high dune I have run up with the heart, but not the body of a 20-year-old. The uphill sprint, the wind, and the view leave me breathless. The thought occurs, I might pass out trying to make this Lake Michigan shoreline picture before the fleeting magic light disappears. Thank God I don't. Changing face. Time marches on, and so does sand. I look at this beautiful dune and the grass and forest land adjacent to it and know it will look very different the next summer. I wonder how much wind and water will change this beautiful area between Lake Michigan and Piney Ridge in 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. Our lives are such a minuscule segment of time gone by and time to come.
Shoreline eruption. When the Lake Michigan shoreline builds up with snow and ice, it becomes a playground for thrill-seeking photographers. I love seeing and hearing the waves slam themselves into the ice and explode into a furious spray, as though the waves and ice are at war with each other. points of light. I have always been fascinated by pointillism and how the colors can be blended to make something larger and more fantastic. While photographing the rocks in front of Big Point Sabo Lighthouse at Ludington State Park, I was impressed by the small points of color on the water, rocks, and ice, and how the colors blended to create a wonderful image. Snowblown. It is exhilarating to watch the white canvas of snow being painted by the bright colors of a Lake Michigan sunset. A snow-covered, wind-blown sand dune along the west edge of M116 was my canvas of choice on this January evening. Riding the wind. Seagulls along Lake Michigan have a reputation for being less than desirable. They seem to have a pinpoint accuracy when it comes to leaving their marks on car windshields. I have also seen many seagulls pester Ludington tourists for a taste of their House of Flavors ice cream, or help themselves to a picnic lunch while beachgoers enjoy a swim. All that aside, I think seagulls are beautiful creatures and they are a joy to photograph. Surf fishing. The skill and determination of the anglers who surf fish along the Lake Michigan shoreline is inspiring. Wind, waves, rain, and even lightning do not appear to deter the fishing desire of the most aggressive anglers. Kingfisher. Kingfishers are incredible in their ability to dive down and grab fish out of the water. The hunt appears effortless and amazingly graceful. I wonder if this kingfisher chuckled to see that a human angler obviously needed more practice with his or her casting skills, thus the fishing line stuck in the tree.
Sounding off. Perhaps calling out to attract a springtime mate. A red-winged blackbird perches along a marsh near Hamlin Lake. As common as red-winged blackbirds are in Michigan, I never tired of seeing them and never take their beauty for granted.
Heckle and Jekyll. Sometimes you just get lucky when you are making photographs. Initially, what caught my eye in this scene were the two stumps and the reflections. As I was hustling to set up my tripod, two starlings appeared and had a face-off before me, possibly over a potential mate. I quickly snapped the shutter just before the birds flew off, chasing each other all the way.
Bluebell. I hiked up and down a lot of sand dunes and through several swales before finding this picture in a cedar swamp area between dune ridges. It was a warm June evening and I was hot. As I tried to photograph this bluebell, my glasses kept steaming up. Finally, I gave up trying to repeatedly wipe the glasses and set them aside. I made the picture and happily set off back over the dunes and through the woods. I was almost back to my car on M116 when I realized I was not wearing my glasses. It was not such a happy walk retracing my steps. I did find them, thanks to the flowers beside them. Had I not, I still think the shot, though expensive, would have been worth the price. Blue jay. A blue jay pauses along the Sauble River before spotting the photographer tucked in some nearby bushes, trying to stay hidden while waiting for one of the state park's resident otters to come into view. Sure enough, the small bird spots me and sounds out its familiar sharp alarm, announcing to all the wildlife within a mile that danger is here. My presence revealed, I decide to give up on the otter for now and turn my camera's attention to the one who blew my cover.
Furry friend. I would not have gotten a photograph of the fox at Ludington State Park if it were not for this chipmunk. The chipmunk had been playing at ease on a log in front of me for several minutes when suddenly it became motionless. I made this picture of my new furry friend and then turned around to see what she was so concerned about. It was then that I spotted the elusive fox.
Face off. A raccoon fleeing from two very irate, very powerful mute swans happens upon a camera and a photographer on the Island Trail boardwalk. The raccoon had intended to steal eggs from the swan's nest. The raccoon quickly learned an important lesson. Getting food from campsites and dumpsters is usually safer than messing with swans. Utterly curious. Coming face to face with this otter startled me, even though I had spotted it a few minutes earlier as it moved between ponds near the north end of the island trail. Figuring where the otter might be, I had stealthily snuck nearly to the edge of the pond when the big otter popped up less than 10 yards away. I jumped back but regrouped in time to get off one quick shot before the equally startled otter dove back underwater. Whiskers. The light of a beautiful June evening making its way into the forest beautifully lit this deer. The deer did not flee, causing me to suspect it might have a fawn nearby. I quickly made this portrait and moved on. The doe was still lingering along the trail watching me as I made my way.
The north end of the Hamlin Dunes caught my eye as we were passing by in our small boat. I hopped out and floated with my life jacket on, using my tripod as a paddle while trying to keep my camera dry above my head. When I got close to the flowers, I was able to stand up, and I found the real hidden treasure I was seeking.
Supernatural. Deep within the forest in the northern part of Ludington State Park lies a pond that my son Brad and I have discovered to be a delightful place. We watched this male wood duck and several others for more than an hour on a late September morning. We waited patiently for them to come closer and then look for those magic moments when the splendid ducks fit in perfectly with their marshy home. Dying art. At first glance, a dead tree is not a pleasant sight. Certainly not a beautiful one, but when a person spends enough time in the forest and comes to appreciate the natural evolution of life and death, one can actually look for and see the beauty in natural things that have died. I felt that way as soon as I saw this scene. Flooding years earlier in this dune valley swale had killed this tree and many others nearby. New life was all around.
Tad's tree. For many of the months my dad and I were shooting at Ludington State Park for this book, my older brother Tad was busy fighting the war in Iraq. The park became a safe haven for my dad and me, a place to clear our heads and our hearts. The park allowed us to somehow feel closer to Tad. This tree on the north edge of the Ridge Trail became a special place for me, and I named it Tad's Tree.
Out of the mist. The symmetry of this tiny Hamlin-like island at Ludington State Park has caught my eye for several years. I tried many times to make a photograph that portrayed its symmetry in a special way. At last, one spring day, Mother Nature provided the perfect atmosphere. The island was barely visible in the early morning mist. I composed a picture, set up the tripod, and waited. Soon, the island emerged out of the mist just enough to appear extraordinary. The view made my entire day extraordinarily great.
Clouds are your friend. My dad is fond of saying, clouds are your friends. This photograph is all about the quality of the light that is bouncing off the clouds and onto the water. Cook's Island. The shallow waters of Hamlin Lake are dotted with tree stumps. Many of the stumps are completely underwater and make a great hideout for different fish species. A few of the larger stumps stick out of the water and provide homes for live vegetation. Locals are fond of naming their favorite stumps. The stump in the left of this photograph is named Cook's Island by a few local Hamlin Lake dwellers.
Spiritual place. The Sauble River Outlet is one of the most beautiful and popular spots at Ludington State Park. Hundreds of people flock to the river mouth on a hot summer day, but it is during quieter times, like this early May evening, that it calls to me the most. Power versus power. A salmon leaps halfway up a wall of cascading water at the Hamlin Dam. Thousands of salmon return to the Sauble River each fall to spawn and to die. I love watching the powerful fish try in vain to leap to the top of the dam, which holds back the fish that work their way upstream on one side and holds back the waters of Hamlin Lake on the other. Splendor in the grass. In photography and in life, getting close to someone or something brings out feelings you've never felt before. That's the kind of strong feelings I seek when I'm fortunate enough to be on the Lake Michigan shoreline with my camera on an evening like this.
On Eagle's Wings. Having multiple camera lenses is a blessing and a curse. After a long snowy hike back from Big Point Sauble Lighthouse, I spotted 6 bald eagles in a row of tall white pines about a quarter-mile ahead. Of course, I had my wide-angle lens on my camera, and I scrambled for my telephoto as each bird took flight and soared overhead. Once I had the proper equipment ready, a 7th bird, an immature bald eagle, came into view. Great blue. For over 6 months, we debated on what image to use as the cover of our new book. We devised an online contest where our customers could vote on 6 different possibilities. Great blue was the overwhelming winner. We believe this image of the great blue heron fishing in the mouth of the Sable River captures the essence of the Ludington State Park. Thank you to all who took the time to vote and write comments.
Fisherman's Dream. This scene reminds me of the one-on-one battle between man and fish Ernest Hemingway wrote about in The Old Man and the Sea. Serious fishermen are like serious photographers. They dream day and night of being there to experience those exhilarating, unforgettable moments they can't imagine living without. For some, it goes beyond being a pastime. It is an important part of their being.
Serenity. My dad and I are lucky to be married to very understanding women. Countless times on family outings at the Ludington State Park, my dad and I have had to run off and chase the light. On this June evening, I was on a walk with my wife and her parents. Our destination was Big Point Sable. Just after we started out, I noticed the light getting good. Betsy noticed my growing agitation and gave me the go-ahead to set off with my camera. Like a dog chasing a tennis ball, I ran as fast as I could from the beach house to Big Point Sable with my 20-pound camera bag and tripod on my back. The reward was so sweet. Thank you, Betsy and Debbie, for your patience.
Into the Wild. This view from high atop Big Point Sable Lighthouse shows the layers of dunes and forests between Lake Michigan and Hamlin Lake and reveals the vastness and beauty of the remote northern area of Ludington State Park. Brad and I climbed to the top of the lighthouse on an early November morning and sat in the dark, anxiously awaiting sunrise. The light and atmosphere that appeared was well worth the chilly wait. Out of this world. Anyone lucky enough to be standing on the storm-flooded Lake Michigan beach near the second curve on October 18, 2007 at 6:49:21 p.m. would have been overwhelmed by the scene before his or her eyes. This was an incredible moment in time, obviously a beautiful, powerful view. But there was something more, an unreal, out-of-this-world quality, a feeling that comes to me only when I witness some of the most rare natural phenomena. Floodlight. When God creates a scene this extraordinary, you pray to God you will be there. Lake Michigan waves flooded the state park beach. The sun dropped out of the clouds and flooded the beach with light. October 18, 2007, 6:44:35 p.m. was one of those magic moments I will never forget. Less than 5 minutes later, I would witness and capture with my digital camera an equally memorable moment. Bottom line for photographers, when it looks this great, focus with all your being on your photography until the magic disappears. Obsession. I hiked the island trail at Ludington State Park religiously the spring of 2007, obsessed with finding wildflowers in bloom. After many days of trekking, this wild iris greeted me on a dewy morning the first week of June in one of the wetland areas of the trail near Hamlin Lake. State bird. No book featuring the wildlife of Ludington State Park would be complete without the official Michigan state bird, the robin. This plump male robin looked like he had been getting more than his fill of berries on an August morning along the Sable River. Family outing. It was a picture that looked like a Monet painting. I was reminded of Monet's Garden series as I made this photographic painting of a pair of mute swans and their newborn cygnets in a marshy cove on Lost Lake. Monet observed that water lilies in his pond were, quote, merely the accompaniment, unquote. And that's the way it is on this occasion on my pond at Ludington State Park. Peaceful coexistence. Brad and I have watched closely how man and nature have coexisted at Ludington State Park. With few exceptions, we have been impressed with how well they have shared the space. State Park management and staff, conservation officers, set the tone and the rules, but they cannot be everywhere at all times. So many times Brad and I have witnessed people truly appreciating and respecting the park and its wildlife residents. Lovers of the park, like these fishermen keeping a non-threatening distance from a nesting mute swan, don't need rules. They want to be good stewards of the park and all its gems. Full alert. Attention on deck. A family of Canada geese appears at full alert along the north bank of the Sauble River on a summer afternoon. Perhaps they are watching for the fox that lives just around the bend, or perhaps they have already spotted the sly predator. Tucked away. Sometimes respecting wildlife means leaving it alone. When I spotted this fawn 75 yards below me as I hiked the Piney Ridge Trail, I wanted to move closer. But I knew if I took even a few steps downhill, the fawn might be scared away from the hiding place where its mother had tucked it away. Instead, I quickly made this environmental portrait with the 500mm lens Brad and I purchased for making wildlife pictures like this without threatening wildlife. I was pleased with the image I quickly made. I was even more pleased to see the fawn still in the same spot when I passed by again a couple hours later.
All ears. Visitors at the Ludington State Park often give my dad and me tips on where to find certain flowers, birds, and animals. On this hot August afternoon, I was busy trying to make a photograph of a robin when I heard someone whistle behind me. When I turned around, I was face to face with a spotted fawn. I don't know who was more surprised, the fawn or the photographer. Needless to say, all the helpful hints were priceless. One with nature. Deer are one animal that you can count on seeing during almost every visit to the Ludington State Park. I made this photograph deep in the park, just off the Coast Guard Trail.
Golden Girl. My photography partner Brad loves this image. My middle son has a very keen eye, and I respect his opinion that this picture must be in this book. He loves how pretty the doe looks standing on a grassy dune crest on a summer evening. But I think most of all, the deer's beautiful face and expression make us feel respect and affection for the deer. Photography is so much about feelings and connotations.
Emerald Garden. Since I was a young boy, I have noticed the beauty of the lush green moss and enjoyed its soft, cushiony texture under my feet. At the north end of the Cedar Campground in the Ludington State Park, there is a steep bank that fills with thick moss every year. I had to wait until October for the fallen leaves, the moss, and the light to come together in a way that was photographically pleasing. Poetry in motion. The late Morgan Cartier was a huge fan of the Ludington State Park. His ancestors were lumber barons in the area, and they were instrumental in helping make the Ludington area what it is today. Morgan was also fascinated with landscape and nature photography. After his death, Morgan's wife Georgette generously gave most of his camera gear to my dad and me. I took this photo with a lens and a tripod that belonged to Morgan. We will forever be grateful to Georgette for her valuable gift. Rolling gold. Stop the truck! This is what I heard right before 4 of our workshop participants shot out the passenger side of my truck with their camera gear in tow. I quickly gave chase, and we all ended up on a large dune ridge facing a brilliant rainbow to the southeast. The entire expanse of the dune turned a vibrant gold.
Fall gathering. Pine needles, a birch log, and a maple leaf came to rest together on the forest floor. It was the first day of November, and colorful leaves were scattered everywhere along the Lost Lake Trail. I spent much of the afternoon looking down, but of all the thousands of colorful leaves I saw that afternoon, this one stood out. On Golden Pond. The wake being made by a male mallard ripples the glassy surface of a pond turned gold by the setting sun. The tranquil scene reminded me of the wonderful Hamlin Lake outings I enjoyed with my parents and my brother Buddy while growing up. Autumn tapestry. The rich, crimson color of these maple leaves stood out in the forest like colorful jewels when I discovered them from afar on the Piney Ridge Trail on a mid-October morning. As the leaves drew me closer, I was also drawn to the beautiful patterns the red leaves and dark branches made against the backdrop of green leaves, not yet turned color. Squirrel hunt. A black squirrel paused beneath the leaves and grass, hunting for food in the Beechwood campground. The squirrel, a couple fishermen camped nearby, and I appeared to have the campground to ourselves this late October evening. It is fun to see the Ludington State Park campgrounds bustling with people and activity in the summer. But the lone squirrel or a deer or a raccoon is the kind of company I would rather have.
The provider. Mink live all along the Sable River at the Ludington State Park. This adult mink was busy finding food for its young. I watched this family of 5 hunt crayfish and chase each other for over an hour before making this photograph. Focal point. My dad and I study a lot of different photographers and their work. Jim Brandenburg is a photographer I admire. Jim's work has a unique look and feel that inspires me. When I was making this photo on the Sable River, it seemed to me the image had a Brandenburg feel. The beauty of art is that the final image has a mix of my style as well as Jim's. Delights. My great-grandma, Martha Delight Benson, had a passion for finding small treasures outdoors. She seemed to gravitate towards beautiful objects that most people would pass by. I believe her ability to go deeper into the scene and find the less obvious beauty in nature was passed down to my dad and me. As I photographed this delicate starflower at the Ludington State Park in June of 2006, I could not help but grin and think of my great-grandma Benson. Chromatic. I love calm mornings when the water is so still it appears to be a steel blue mirror. On an early morning adventure, these lily pads near the Lost Lake Trail quickly grabbed my attention. I set up my tripod in the water and carefully composed the photograph while making certain that none of the reflections of the flowers were cut off. Once the ripples were gone and the water returned to its mirror-like state, I gently clicked the shutter. Vertigo. I love watching people's reactions to this photograph. I have found that people either really like this image or they don't. Personally, this is one of my favorite photographs I have ever taken. That is the beauty of art. It is in the eye of the beholder. Discerning light. The island in front of the swimming area at the Ludington State Park has many different names. I know 2 different families who have named the island in honor of their dogs because it was their pets' favorite stomping grounds during family vacations. The most common unofficial name that I have heard for this glorious piece of God's creation is Blueberry Island. Northern exposure. Tuesday night usually finds my wife singing in the community choir at West Shore Community College. That means that on Tuesdays I get our daughter Julia all to myself. I often load Julia in the jogging stroller and we head off the beaten path looking for photographs. I believe Julia is my muse because every time we go picture hunting together, I am able to see the world in photographs better than I can alone.
Down. For the blue heron, one of nature's finest fishermen, catching fish is a matter of stealth and patience. But once the catch is within reach, as was the case on the Sable River this August morning, it is simply a matter of keeping a sharp eye on the target and following through. Up. After striking down at its prey, the blue heron comes up with its catch so quickly that according to the electronic data recorded by my digital camera, only 1 second elapsed between the previous photograph and this one. In. After pausing briefly with its catch, the blue heron extends its neck and dumps the fish down the hatch. My parents live near the Ludington State Park. They are most happy if the herons find that fishing is good on the Sable River rather than the goldfish pond in their backyard.
The Forgotten Forest. As I made my personal journey of photographing the Ludington State Park, I relished the opportunity to explore areas of the park that I had never seen before. It seemed that over every dune and behind every pine row, there was a whole new world to discover and photograph. I knew when I found this section of dead trees that there was a great picture waiting to be made. I sat on a small sand mound for about 10 minutes waiting for the light to hit the trees and give them life again.
April look. I have always found the bark of birch trees to be interesting and attractive. This decaying birch on the Piney Ridge Trail at the south end of Ludington State Park stopped me in my tracks on an April 29 afternoon hike. Though the trunk was badly decayed, the patterns, varied tones, and textures interested me. I made this image with budding maple branches as the backdrop. The same scene would look dramatically different on October 27, as you'd see in the next picture. October look. This decaying birch tree had caught my eye a half year earlier. But on this late October afternoon, the colorful leaves whipping in the wind behind the birch provided a very different backdrop.
Spring singing. Hearing birds sing in the springtime is therapy for my soul. Photographing small birds is a bigger challenge than most people would expect. They flitter around so fast that it is hard to make a photograph that is in focus, sharp, and well composed. My hat goes off to those photographers who make a living photographing birds. Squirrel bait. Whenever I see acorns on the ground, it reminds me of the acorn fights I used to get in with my two brothers Tad and Willie and my cousin Ryan. We would spend a few minutes gathering our arsenals, stuffing our pockets with as many acorns as possible. Then the acorn throwing war was on. Oh, to be a kid again.
Sunshine delight. Some pictures just brighten your day. This one brightens mine every time I look at it. Red squirrel shots are easy to come by, but this little creature looked especially cute when he chose to frame himself perfectly between the branches of a white pine tree along the Sauble River in the sunshine of a September morning. I can't help but feel good and smile looking at this image.
Eye to eye. Staring down a large toad, eye to eye, on the island trail at the Ludington State Park was a hoot. I love getting close to my subject and truly enjoy the challenge of trying to show nature from its own perspective. As most fairy tale princesses would agree, toads are not creatures of great beauty. However, when you get close enough to a toad that the end of your lens is touching its nose, you realize that toads do have an amazing beauty all their own.
Turtle tracks. Underway and making way. Slow but sure. A turtle plods along the beach near the Ludington State Park beach house. The turtle's slow pace gave me time to create an artistic composition that emphasized the beauty of its tracks. The highlights and shadows resulting from the bright, low-in-the-sky evening light raking across the beach made the tracks more distinct and more beautiful.
The Queen's Rising. As the sun rises above Hammond Lake and the birds start singing, a new world is awakening, a world that is begging to be discovered. Whether exploring her by land or by sea, Ludington State Park, Queen of the North, will not disappoint. Night flight. Hammond Lake is one of Michigan's largest man-made lakes and is certainly one of the most popular. The lake is named after Hannibal Hamlin, who was Vice President of the United States under Abraham Lincoln. He lived before the advent of human flight, so sadly, he never got to see this view of his namesake. CCC Legacy. In 1936, the Civilian Conservation Corps built the beach house at the Ludington State Park. The CCC also built many of the current park roads and 12 warming shelters on the trail system. Unfortunately, many of the original shelters were destroyed by vandalism and severe weather. Luckily, though, the beach house remains and is a beautiful piece of history.
Follow the leader. Sometimes you get to see something in nature so heartwarming it gives you a feeling of euphoria. This rare piping plover chick and two of its siblings had flown the coop and were missing in action. Well, actually, the rare chicks couldn't fly yet, so they hopped away with their parents from the shelter erected by humans to protect the endangered species from predators and human footsteps. They hopped so far from their Dune Valley nest site that it was a couple hours before we spotted them by a pond over the next dune ridge. We were greatly relieved they were alive and well. Being able to capture this parenting moment added to the euphoria.
Glamorous. I stood 20 feet out in Lake Michigan on a stormy summer evening with waves crashing into me as I tried to steady my tripod for a long 30-second exposure. Like so many times before, I was awestruck by the glamorous beauty of Big Point Sable Lighthouse. The Sable Point Lighthouse Keepers Association has done a brilliant job of restoring the lighthouse and bringing back its incredible grandeur.
Time tested. Big Point Sable Lighthouse has stood the test of time. The date above the exterior door tells the story of her age. The tower itself looks remarkably well preserved during its 140th birthday celebration held on October 27, 2007 by its caretakers, the Sable Point Lighthouse Keepers Association. The volunteer keepers have been a godsend for the light and the attached keepers' dwelling. Winter World. Brad and I are winter persons. We love being outside in the snow, photographing, hiking, cross-country skiing, downhill skiing, you name it. But on a winter day as magical as this, we'd better be shooting pictures. We were, and I'm glad we were, following a deer trail through the pines south of the dam at Ludington State Park led me into a winter world of white. Winter outlook. I had hiked through heavy snow for several hours on a January morning, occasionally finding a picture worth taking. On my way back from making the image I had pre-visualized on Lost Lake. I got an added bonus when these deer peered out from their snow shelter. The bonus shot was an example of what we preach to our workshop students. Look for what you expect or plan to shoot, but be alert and ready for the unexpected shot.
Forging dusk. During most sunsets along the Lake Michigan shoreline, the sun appears to tranquilly disappear below the horizon. However, occasionally at dusk, the sun, clouds, water, and sand mold and blend to create a powerful mixture of molten beauty.
Goldfish. We had been trying unsuccessfully to make a strong photograph of an eagle all morning before turning our attention to photographing salmon making their annual return to the Sable River from Lake Michigan. It was the last week of October, and the fall color reflecting off the wind-rippled surface of the water made this salmon appear to be under stained glass. It was not the image I had set out to make, but it turned out to be one of my favorite images from a year of intensely photographing Ludington State Park.
Electric landscape. My dad and I have found that the best way to photograph lightning is using the longest exposure possible for the given situation. This photograph is a 30-second exposure at f8 and an ISO of 100. It was shot on a sturdy tripod that could withstand the 30 miles per hour wind. This fierce thunderstorm headed north very quickly, and it took out power in Manistee, Michigan. Blue moon. On the evening of the second full moon of July 2004, my wife Betsy and I walked the island trail at Ludington State Park. We patiently awaited the moonrise over Hamlin Lake. Once the moon appeared, it rose so quickly I was only able to get a few good shots. The moon at night is one of the most difficult subjects to photograph because of its relatively rapid motion and the low light conditions. Northern Light Show. One of my ultimate dreams in photography has been to capture the northern lights with my camera. On December 14, 2006, my dream was realized. Around 8:30 p.m., I trekked to the top of a large dune within the Ludington State Park. 5 minutes later, the entire evening sky over Lake Michigan erupted into a bright red and green palette of color. As I was exposing this photograph, two large meteors blazed through the sky. The rush of emotions I felt that night were overwhelming.
I spent my life at the Ludington State Park in spurts, like most Ludington people. We're very busy, we work hard, we've got all kinds of obligations, but when we can, we like to get out there. It's one of our favorite places. So you think you're just so in tune with this place, And doing a book like this and basically kind of living life at Ludington State Park as much as business would permit. Gosh, you just really find out how amazing a place it is, and you just get so close to it, and that has been the big joy of this book, and kind of a surprise. I mean, we always know we get close, but you don't expect to get that close. I think the big thing that we found out was, as we went deeper and deeper into the park, as we went to places that, unless we were doing this book, we wouldn't get around to it. We wouldn't really get there. You know, we would intend to get there. We would talk about getting there. But when you have a mission like this to accomplish, you get there. So you hike the 4 miles to the top of the Ridge Trail. You hike to the sand dunes that your family spent time in as a kid. You know, you go on trails that you want to make sure you find that you never thought were, I don't want to say not worth going there, but they seem so secondary. You know, the Island Trail at the state park is an obvious gem. It weaves its way along Hamlin Lake and Lost Lake, and we've got many of our good pictures there. But there were a lot of other trails that we spent a lot more time on that were just awesome in what we discovered. So it was a new journey, and we made a lot of new discoveries, and that was terrific. One day, after 6 months of looking for eagles and actually getting kind of panicky that this might end up being a book without a really, really great eagle shot in it. Brad had one nice shot of an immature eagle that had flown over his head on a hike to Big Saba Lighthouse. But other than that, most of our eagle shots were from, an 1/8 of a mile away or on the fly. So one day, as we had got a tip from Steve Banash, who was the managing editor of the Ludington Daily News, and we followed up on that tip, and we were in a little teeny skiff, and we were traversing on Hamlin Lake in a little cove, and all of a sudden we spotted what we thought might be an eagle. And as we got closer and checked with the binoculars, indeed it was an eagle. And you'd have thought it was a golden eagle, not a bald eagle, because we just kind of went ape. You know, we were so excited, and it's like if you're a fisherman and you've got the giant sturgeon coming into your spearing hole, or you got you're a deer hunter and you see the biggest buck you've ever seen, or it's just such a rush. You know, for Brad and Misty and I, this project has given us an intense outlet for our emotions, which otherwise are often centered on worrying about having a son in Iraq in a very dangerous position as an infantry officer leading men in harm's way on a regular basis. So if you allow yourself to dwell on that, it really starts eating at you. Going to the park, strangely enough, there's kind of two perspectives. One is you get out there and you see things like eagles or porcupines or beautiful flowers after spring rain, or you see a spectacular sunset at the park. All those things, they're like an escape. They're a rush of their own, and they allow you to not dwell on that stress that sometimes isn't even at the conscious level, but at the unconscious level, it's affecting you a great deal. Well, there's another aspect, and that's the kind of thing where the park is a place where I can go and I can be with Tad, even though Tad isn't there. I can sit there in the woods in a snowstorm with the flakes coming down And after a time, just almost in a very meditative kind of state there, watch the forest and watch the snow and turn my thoughts to Tad, and they're good thoughts, you know. I mean, I'm uncomfortable, getting a little cold and a little antsy because a deer hasn't come along in this snowstorm, but I know my son is facing, you know, much greater threats for sure, and much more discomfort. And yet, even having those thoughts, I can sit there and have very positive thoughts about how much I love him and how much I miss him, and pray for him to come home. And that's it's a good thing. It's like a bonding kind of thing with your son, even though you aren't physically together. You're there in spirit with him. So the park has been good therapy in that regard.
All the wonderful images you have seen on this DVD and in our book, Ludington State Park, Queen of the North, are available in many sizes and many formats. You can order any image that we sell in multiple sizes. Our frame pieces are gallery wrap canvases, and they're ready to hang on the wall. They start at 14 inches and go all the way up to a 60 by 90 inch triptych with many sizes in between. The images in the book are available matted and unmatted in a variety of sizes.
We also look forward to you visiting our Ludington Gallery. Brad and I are often here, and we enjoy conversations about photography, about the park, about the area. We also enjoy giving out tourist information, so please stop by and get an opportunity to see all these images and give us the opportunity to meet you.
Check us out at toddandbradreed.com. Millions of people have been able to enjoy the Ludington State Park year after year because our forefathers and our ancestors had the insight to preserve this place and to make laws and protect it and keep it pristine and wild. And generation after generation has picked up that torch and continued to make this place just an incredible place to bring your family and to explore. There's many groups and organizations that are still working every day, volunteering their time and energy to keep this place natural. The Friends of Ludington State Park is a great organization.
Point Sabo Lightkeepers Association has taken a lighthouse which was basically pretty much abandoned except for the light. The keeper's dwelling had been heavily vandalized, and over a period of 20 years or more, they have restored it to beyond belief, to just this beautiful place that if people are willing to walk a mile and a half, and that's a mile and a half that's well worth it, they get rewarded with one of the finest historic ventures and beautiful sights they've ever seen. So when people come and visit this park, they have to stop and just think about who's keeping this like this besides all these volunteers, and you know, there's paid people that do such a good job, and foremost is the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And I really think of Park Manager Mike Mullen, who just retired after being here for I think 18 years. He put his stamp on this, and his stamp was to protect everything and to run a tight ship and to not allow the natural beauty of this place to be abused by anybody for any reason. There were no favors. Everybody was treated well and equally.
And Alan Warnett from the Nature Center here He actually wrote the chronology part of our book, and just a great guy. And if you ever get a chance to go on a snowshoe hike with him or one of the guided hikes out to the shipwreck along Lake Michigan, he can tell you stories for hours and keep you totally entertained. And he's a great guy.
Another group that Brad and I would like to give credit to, and it's not so much for the state park directly, but places like Ludington State Park are disappearing. Thank God we have Ludington State Park, because when you look around your neighborhoods and your subdivisions and your countrysides, great photographer Sam Abel for National Geographic talks about looking at America and seeing that photography in America, rural America today, is becoming more about the art of exclusion than inclusion, and basically meaning that it's hard to keep all the junk out of a picture. Well, here we have this beautiful, pristine place, and that's assured here. It's public land. It'll stay public land. Just has to be taken care of. But there's other places, private land, that's just getting eaten up fast, turning into subdivisions and stuff. And nothing wrong with subdivisions, but pretty soon we aren't going to have a lot left. So the Land Conservancy of West Michigan is one of those groups that will take a landowner and give them an opportunity to put their land in a conservancy, maybe get some tax breaks and other benefits, and also have the opportunity to be able to afford to keep their land natural as opposed to getting overdeveloped. Maybe some development, but not overdeveloped. And more of that needs to be done in America today, or our children and grandchildren just aren't going to have being able to see much of these kind of views like we're enjoying out here today. Before our decision to make this book, Brad and I had only scratched the visual surface of Ludington State Park with our cameras. Like so many other lifelong Ludington residents who live within minutes of this place, we came here on occasion. This world-class gem, considered by millions of people to be the queen of Michigan State Park, lies in our backyard. Yet we did not truly know her well, and since we did not know her, we could not love her the way generations of families who have camped in her woods year after year do. Our brief visits and fair weather adventures were more like sporadic love affairs with the park than a long-term relationship with her, and we didn't know we were missing the truer love that comes with a deeper relationship. In studying the great American painter Andrew Wyeth, I read that he had advised another artist to go deeper instead of wider. Brad and I now understand that is how you come to really know a place and feel and see its heart and soul. Brad and I went deep into the forests and dunes of Ludington State Park day after day for more than a year. The more we went, the more we discovered. The more we hiked her beaches, dunes, and trails and floated her waters, the more our infatuation turned to passion. In the end, we were madly in love with this place, married to it. Discovering and photographing the eagles of Ludington State Park stands out as one of the most exhilarating experiences Brad and I have ever shared. One summer day, after 6 months of searching throughout the park for a nest or favorite perch, we suddenly spotted what looked like a bald eagle. Despite our excitement, we each managed to get off a couple decent shots. We were flying high. We didn't know it yet, but we would capture far more splendid shots of these majestic birds. As euphoric as we felt while seeing and photographing eagles, some of our solitary journeys in Ludington State Park were good for the soul. One day, I was sitting in the snow atop the Coast Guard Trail, waiting for a deer to come to a tiny open spot in a frozen pond surrounded by snow-laden evergreens. It was a picture waiting to happen. All I needed was for a deer to show up, as tracks in the snow indicated they recently had. At first, I was pumped up, comfortable, content, oblivious to the elements. But as time passed, doubts, discomfort, and anxiety grew, as it often does for photographers. It was then that my thoughts and prayers turned elsewhere, to my oldest son, Tad, an infantry officer in the United States Army. While I faced no threats, was only slightly uncomfortable, and had a warm car and thermos of coffee a short hike away, Tad and the men in his platoon were continually facing stifling heat and constant danger. Thinking of Tad put life in perspective. I was privileged to be able to pause there in those peaceful woods, like poet Robert Frost, watching the snow floating softly down. I was dreaming of the day when Tad and I and our entire family would once again experience the Queen of the North together. Our journey of discovery for this book is complete. We hope the images on these pages will cause people to see Ludington State Park like they have never seen her before.